All right, so this is the start of Unit 5, and we're starting off with 5.1, congruent triangles. Congruent triangles says triangles with the same shape and size. This means all corresponding parts, and what I mean by corresponding, I'm referring to the angles and sides. So all corresponding parts, angles and sides are congruent. And remember, the symbol for congruent is the equal sign with the squiggle above it. Now, when you have congruency statements, when triangles are congruent, we can write a congruency statement, which this is an example down here. Here we have triangle ABC is congruent to triangle DEF. And so you can see here that triangle ABC sides AB is congruent to DE, and the fact that the order matters in the way they are written. So A and D are congruent, B and E are congruent. You can also see here by the little markings how they have the same marks. And then C and F are congruent along with each of the sides. Now, a valid congruency statement must match all corresponding angles and sides. Now, CPCTC, what is that? Well, this says corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. That's basically saying that each part of a triangle is going to be also congruent if the triangles are congruent. If we know two triangles are congruent, then we know that every pair of corresponding parts is also congruent. And what I mean by a pair of corresponding parts, I'm referring to either the angles or the sides. So let's go straight into this. It says list all congruent angles and sides given the congruency statements. So here we have triangle JKL is congruent to triangle PQR. Now, the order that these letters were written are very important because they correspond to what the second triangle says. So if I'm referring to angles, angle J is the first angle in this triangle. This is going to be congruent to angle P because it's the first angle in this triangle. Then the second angle K is going to be congruent to angle Q. Notice how both of those are in the second position, so therefore those are corresponding. Then the last one says angle L is congruent to angle R. Okay, so J and P are congruent, K and Q are congruent, and L and R are congruent. Now that's when we're referring to angles. Now when I'm referring to sides, the first side, remember we're using two letters whenever you're dealing with sides. So the first side I have is JK, which is going to be congruent to the first two letters here, which is PQ. Then I have KL, the second two letters, is going to be congruent to QR. Then the third side would be using J and L. Notice I use the first and the third, and that's going to be congruent to P and R. So here you have a list of the angles and the sides that are congruent to each other. Then it asks you to write another valid congruency statement. Now, there's technically more than one answer, but what this is saying is we're going to write this, but I'm going to rearrange these letters. So instead of triangle JKL, I can have, let's go with LKJ. So all I did was rearrange these. Now, when I go to write the congruency statement for this, I know I'm going to still have a triangle, but if I went in a specific order for the first one, I have to match that order for the next one. Well, if I started out with the angle L, that means this one has to start off with R. Then I went with K, then I go with Q, and then I went with J, which is the same as P. So I'll have now triangle LKJ is congruent to triangle RQP. Example 2, here we have the same thing. We have triangle WXY is congruent to triangle EFG. So I start off with my angles. I have angle W, angle X, angle Y. And so if that's the order that they were given, I need to find the corresponding angle that's congruent. Well, the first one listed would be my angle E. Then congruent to angle X would be angle F. And then congruent to angle Y would be angle G. So once again, notice these are in the same order, and that means that those would be congruent. Same thing with the sides. I have WX, notice this the first two, is congruent to EF. Then I can have side XY is congruent to side FG. Then I can have WY is congruent to EG. And so now, if I'm writing another valid congruency statement, I have triangle, and I'm just going to rearrange these. So I have YWX. Now, does this have to be the only answer? No, I can change these in any order. I could put XYW, XWY. It doesn't matter. Just as long as the second part matches whatever this one is. So if I start off with the Y, that means I need to start off with triangle G. Then I had my W, which is E, and then X, which is F. So this should be congruent to triangle GEF. Now in example 3, it says, given triangle KPM is congruent to triangle AYC, we're going to complete each of the following statements. Well, side KM is this side right here. Okay, notice KM is the first and the last letter. Well, if the corresponding congruent side with that would be side AC, which is this side. Notice how I'm also marking them with a single tick mark. Then we have CY, so it's a different side here. CY is, notice these last two, which would mean that these two are corresponding to that. So I should have side MP. Then we have side PK, 1, 2, 3. This is the third side now, which has to be referring to this last one, which is going to be side YA. Okay, because I had PK is these two first ones, so therefore I'm referring to these first two. Now, angle Y is congruent to angle P. Angle K is congruent to angle A, but notice this one's asked for angle ACY, which is still an angle, but I'm using 3 letters. So ACY, I'm going to go in the same order that I did here. So that means I'm dealing with angle K, then I went with the M, and then I went with P. So ACY means KMP. I have to do the same order for each triangle. Then we have triangle MPK, so I'm going to have congruent to triangle. M is the same as C, P is the same as Y, K is the same as A. So I have triangle CYA. Then we have triangle YAC, so I have triangle Y is the same as P, A is the same as K, and then C is the same as M. So there we have it. Now let's go to the next one. In these examples, it says given triangle STW is congruent to triangle BFN, we're going to find each missing measure. So this one's a little bit different. I'm not necessarily naming this part that's congruent. I'm actually giving the measure. So notice in each of these triangles, we have some values that are labeled for us. Well, I'm going to start off by filling in all the missing parts of each of these triangles. So I can see that angle S is 67 degrees, which is going to be congruent to angle B. So if this is 67, then this has to be 67. Now, if angle N is 82 degrees, I know that that is congruent to angle W. So this is 82 degrees. Now to find this third angle, we're going to have to use the fact that all angles add up to 180 degrees. So I'm going to do 180 minus 67 minus 82, which is going to give me 31 degrees. So angle F is 31 degrees, which I know is congruent to angle T, which is also 31 degrees. So now all my angles are filled in. Now let's talk about the sides. Side SW is congruent to side BN. So if this is 9, I know this has to be 9. Side TW is congruent to FN. So if this is 14, I know this is 14. And then that means that this last one, which is ST, is congruent to BF, which has to be 17. So now that I have all the parts concluded, I can fill in my missing blank. BN is 9. TW, which is right here, is 14. And BF, which is right here, which is 17. Then I go with my angles. Angle W we found was 82 degrees. Angle B was 67 degrees. And angle F was 31 degrees, which should be easy to do once we have all the parts. In example 5, same thing. We have triangle GHJ is congruent to triangle XYZ. Find each missing measure. Well, in this case, this is important here. These two little tick marks tell us that this is an isosceles triangle. So if this side is 27, then this side also has to be 27. Now, HJ I know is congruent to YZ, so therefore this is 27. And if these are both congruent, that means this also has to be 27. Now, GJ is congruent to XZ, which is 18. So this is 18. Angle Y, which of 38, is congruent to angle H. So this has to be 38 degrees. Now, the only thing I'm missing are these angles. Well, because I know this is isosceles, and I know this top angle, technically to find this, I would do 180 minus 38, and you divide it by 2 because both of these should be equal. And so therefore, we would have to divide whatever's left over after taking out this top part, which is going to give me 71. So if both of these are 71, then that means these also have to be 71 degrees. So now let's fill in what we know. GJ was 18, XY was 27, and then YZ or ZY is also 27. Measure of angle H is 38 degrees. Measure of angle Z is 71 degrees. And measure of angle J is also 71 degrees. All right. Example 6, we have given triangle UVW is congruent to triangle TSR. Find the values of X, Y, and Z. So first of all, X is right here where it says 12X minus 7. I know that this is UV has to be congruent to TS. So I know that those two correspond together. And so to find the equation for this, to solve for X, you're going to set each of these equal to each other. So I have 12X minus 7 equals 53. And so when you see minus 7, I'm going to add 7 to both sides. This is gone. Now I have 12x equals 60. Then I'm going to divide by 12, and therefore x equals 5. So that's the first one. Now, y is located here on SR. So side SR, I'm going to mark with the second tick marks, or 2 tick marks, is technically congruent to VW. So in VW, that's congruent there. And so to find the value of y, I'm going to set 5y minus 33 equals 57. And so now, to solve, I'm going to add 33 to both sides. This is gone. 5y equals 90, because 57 plus 33 is 90. And then I'm divide by 5, and y equals 18. Then the last part. UW is the same as TR. So I'm going to mark these with 3 tick marks because those I know are congruent. And so to set up this equation, I have 3z plus 14 equals 50. And so I can subtract 14 on both sides. This is gone. 3z equals 36. Then I divide by 3, and z equals 12. Now in example 7, says if triangle QRS is congruent to MNP. Now, sometimes it helps to draw a picture. So I'm going to draw 2 triangles. And I'm going to make sure I label my angles. So I have QRS. Now, because I have QRS, to try and help myself, I'm going to make sure I go in the same order. So I have MNP. so that I know that each corresponding part is congruent to each other. Then I'm going to take the information that they gave me and label what's needed. So I have QR equals 11, QS is equal to 15, MP is 2x plus 1. The measure of angle S is 84 degrees. The measure of angle R is 32 degrees. And the measure of angle M is 17y minus 4. So this is 17y minus 4 degrees. All right, we need to find the values of x and y. So down here, MP is x. Well, I know that this corresponds to this side because MP corresponds to QS. So to take this, 2x plus 1, I'm going to equal it to 15 and solve for x. So we get minus 1, that's gone. 2x equals 14. Divide this by 2, and x equals 7. So that's one answer, because these two were congruent to each other. Now I need to find y, which is technically the measure of angle M. Well, I know measure of angle M is congruent to the measure of angle Q. However, I don't know Q at the moment, but I do know these two, and I can actually find Q by subtracting 180 minus 32 minus 84. So if I subtract these, this ends up giving me 64 degrees. And so because angle Q is 64 degrees and angle M has to equal 64 degrees. So I have 17y minus 4 equals 64 because those are congruent to each other. So I'm going to start by solving and add 4 on both sides. That's gone. 17y equals 68. Divide by 17 and y equals 4.